And there we go. So now it's back to where it was. And so inside of the allocate method here, when it goes looking for my array of boxes and it doesn't find it inside of this function, it's going to look out in the alley right here and find it, and it's going to be able to use that variable. So hopefully that's not too confusing. We can cover that in class again. When we talk, and just so you know the programming terminology, when we talk about the alleyway, this is what we call the instance scope. So in other words, all functions can access that variable that are inside of this class. Now that gets us to a point where we have three separate methods, each with a single responsibility. They are all still inside of the document class, but this is pretty clean code at this point. Now in the next class we're going to do a further refactoring where we actually get into making more than one class, and then we can see how those interact with each other, and then you're really getting into some interesting code and you'll be able to make some really cool stuff. The last thing that I want to mention is that this little keyword here, private. Now we talked about what that meant, and we talked about that methods can be private or they can be public, and not to jump ahead too much, but basically anything that is private is not going to be viewable by other classes, by other objects. It's only going to be viewable in the class that it is actually declared inside of. So in this case it's the document class. Now up to now we've got only one class, so that's not really a big deal. But as we move forward and this starts getting a little bit more sophisticated and we're creating other classes, we're going to want to have a way that we can control what one class can see or access inside of another class. And a good example is kind of the example of human beings themselves, and we talked about how a human being is actually a very, very sophisticated kind of object, but it has a simple API, right? Just like five senses. So I can talk to somebody and they can hear me. They can see something that I'm doing, but inside of them there are millions of complex processes going on, and it would actually be pretty bad if anybody could access those processes of another person. Like if you could actually reach in and change the way a person's heart was working or something like that, that would be chaos. Like society simply couldn't function like that. So instead humans are what we call encapsulated. They've got a simple public API, but a complicated private API. And when we mark our functions as private or public, what we're doing is we're really setting that up, where we can have like a very simple public API that other objects can access. But then we might have actually quite a complex private API, a lot of internal processes that other objects should not be able to touch. So as we continue, we're going to get into that a good deal more. Up to now it might not make sense of why we would do that, but in the next class we're going to start taking some of these methods and moving them out into entirely separate classes, and those classes are going to have the responsibilities of doing things like creating objects, setting their properties, and making them visible or invisible, or maybe even moving them around on stage. So that's kind of where that is going. So just kind of stick with it for now, and in short order that's going to make a lot of sense to you, and you're going to see why we would do it that way. And that's kind of the basis of object-oriented programming. So that is kind of what we covered in workshop inside of the last class. And I'm going to pause this so I can get a drink of water. My voice is starting to go, and then we will take a quick look at what we learned in the production skills portion of the class as well.